sense, and into the connections between power and the movement of knowledge. And this is similar to questions raised by Foucault or Paterai or multiple other anthropologists. And then again, it goes into the nature of how property works in a changing system. It's due to a global IP regime that things that could not previously have been privately owned now can be bought, sold, licensed, and stolen. So contradictions at the margins. So there are two main ways that anthropologists have interacted with IP. And I'm simplifying this a little bit to make a point. But I think it's legitimate. So the first way is through indigenous and minority peoples and approaches to cultural property. So this approach has come to focus on the somewhat audacious possibility of how we could use an intellectual property-like system in order to protect indigenous peoples' rights to their sacred songs, stories, and their knowledge of local biodiversity. In effect, this is using the language of the powerful to protect the powerless. As opposed to earlier kinds of intellectual property, which really promotes only Western scientific knowledge and only private property as valid. And these former types of intellectual property and patenting actually allows the exploitation of indigenous peoples. And so in order to prevent that, this cultural property approach seeks to expand the scope of IP and to strengthen it. And this way, they can give powerless peoples new tools that they can use to protect themselves. So then the second approach really focuses in much more on a technological level, which is looking at open source software and issues of the commons. So this approach focuses on the consequences of the expanding scope and duration of copyright protection in music, movies, and the software industry. Scholars are interested in the emerging cultural, political, and technical movements that promote innovation through the sharing or mixing of previous works. So by combining or copying things that were already there, they make new works. And this is part of creation in this particular view. So underlying this work, this second section of work, is a way to question the ideological concept of the author, or a romantic concept of a single author that produces single works. And this also helps to undermine the idea of a natural rights system, that I am the author, I gave birth to it. Because if I am the author, it means that I'm doing something all on my own. What this perspective is really talking about is how all authors, all of us, are building on things that have happened previously. And so by emphasizing the author of the moment, in effect, you're downplaying the work that has gone before you. So it's really a shift of emphasis here. So in other words, in this case, in the second case, IP is bad. Where in the first case, IP could be good. In the second case, IP is bad. And we should limit its scope and duration as much as possible in order to protect general public access to knowledge. So the contradiction. The problem is then that these two different approaches to IP actually work at opposite ends to each other. One advocates for stronger and wider IP protections on the basis of human rights, while the other undermines a human rights approach and advocates for weaker or sometimes the complete dismantling of IP in favor of sharing or collaboration. So the question remains, why are these contradictory? In fact, my personal view on this is that the reason that we have a contradiction at all is because of the intellectual property umbrella. It's taken things that are very, very different kinds of property and very, very different kinds of movements and put them together through a rhetorical framework that allows arguments from one end to slide very easily to support arguments against another end. And so there's really two or more different kinds of knowledge involved. And the problem is that Disney, for instance, who wants to make copyright eternal or forever so that they can forever control Mickey Mouse and all of their other creations, they will use arguments from indigenous property movements that talk about how this is a product of this group's culture, and say, well, Disney Corporation has also created this set of culture, and it should also have property in eternity for it. And it also works on the other side. There's examples for the other side as well. So in order to understand the rhetorical power of IP, of intellectual property, and to begin to break down this umbrella, we need to supplement the work at the margins with work at the center, with work on patents and innovation and high technology. And that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to start to do with this overall project. So now, we're going to look at patents in practice. So what is a patent in Taiwan? What does it mean for Taiwanese companies and their employees? So the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 says, "The Congress shall have power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries." So patents are a nation-based law. The rights a patent gives you, they stop at the borders of that nation. So say I have a US patent on a new chair. And I have that same patent, I've applied for that same patent in Europe and Germany and Japan as well. Now that doesn't mean that you could quite easily look at my patent, find out how to do it, produce it in India where I don't have a patent, and then sell it in South Africa where I also don't have a patent, and it's completely legal. There's no way I can stop you, there's no way you're infringing my rights. So patents are national in that sense. So then isn't it a little bit odd that if patents are national, and I'm talking about Taiwan, then why in the world would I quote the US Constitution? So it's something that I was thinking about as well. And so one of the things I started to do at the very beginning of my project is when I interview people, I ask them what is a patent. And almost everybody replied with something along the lines of the US Constitution. A lot of people actually refer to the US Constitution when they quote it back to me. And of course, this is perhaps because I'm American. I mean, that makes sense that people are playing to what they know I know. But on the other hand, I think it's more than that. And I have another example, for instance. There's actually a couple other examples. One that I'm going to give is the fact that Taiwanese patent laws are actually updated almost annually in order specifically to keep up with new court cases and new case law, precedent law that has happened in the US over the past year or two. So this is despite the fact that Taiwan's legal system is still more civil law, which means it's based on statutes, and not common law, which means common law would be based on precedent. So common law is supposed to evolve with judges' decisions. Statutes are supposed to be much more long-term, and judges make decisions based on the statutes rather than based on experience of other cases. So why would this be? Why would Taiwan be conforming their patent law so much to the United States? So at least partly, I think this is because a lot of the intellectual property experts in Taiwan are US trained. So it's an educational part to it. A second part, though, has to do with the United States' political and economic power, as well as its somewhat strange relationship, particularly with Taiwan. And through these two things, the US plays a very active role in determining what a proper patent system or intellectual property system in general should be. And this you can see very clearly again in Section 301. Do you all know what Section 301 was? Have you all heard of that? Some? No. Section 301 is basically one of the ways that the United States uses to promote trade or stop trade with countries that either conform to the U.S.'s view of intellectual property or not. And I think a lot of people in Taiwan will have heard of it because it usually makes the news here. If you've heard of an IP watch list, that has to, or an IP warning list, that has to do with Section 301. Okay, so then the third reason for why Taiwan really looks to the U.S. in that sense is because of the importance of the American market for Taiwanese products. And this is the reason that most of my interviewees have talked about. So even though patenting is a nation-based system, it also includes the right to exclude others from importing